Okay, in this section, I'm going to talk about our 3 different program options. We're going to go through each program and see how payments are triggered. The first program that I'm going to start with is the Price Loss Coverage Program, which we refer to as PLC. This program offers price protection only. And basically, payments are going to trigger for the PLC program when the effective price for the year falls below the effective reference price for the year. There's not a lot of changes in the PLC program, but this term effective reference price is a big change from the previous years, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. Just a reminder for PLC, you can make that election on a crop-by-crop basis beginning in the 2020 or 2019 election period. Beginning in 2021, you do have the option to change your program election. So this is something that we covered on previous slides. In these next couple slides, I'm just going to talk about some definitions that of some terms that you're going to hear me talk about in the PLC portion of this webinar. The payment acres for PLC is going to be 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres on the farm. So if you have a farm with 100 base acres of wheat, your PLC payment acres would be 85% of that, which would be 85 acres of wheat. The effective price for the year is going to be the higher of the current year's marketing year average price or the national loan rate for that specific covered commodity. Whichever one is higher is what we will use for the effective price. This next slide shows our reference prices. So you can see for barley, the reference price is $4.95 per bushel. For wheat, it's $5.50 per bushel. For corn, it's $3.70 per bushel. These reference prices are the exact same as they were under the previous Farm Bill. So under the previous Farm Bill, if you participated in PLC, you might have a good idea as to how this program worked. But basically, we looked at these reference prices. And so if we were looking at barley, if the marketing year average price for the year fell below $4.95 per bushel, then we triggered a PLC payment for barley. It's not quite as simple anymore because now we have this effective reference price. So we're not just looking at the reference price, we're looking at the effective reference price to determine if a PLC payment is going to trigger. The effective reference price is going to be the lesser of either 115% of the reference price or the greater of the reference price or 85% of the 5-year Olympic average marketing year average price for the covered commodity. That sounds really confusing, but we're going to go through a couple of examples to hopefully help you understand what exactly we're looking for here. This is actually a benefit, even though it complicates the program a little bit, because it allows for the effective reference price to be higher in years where we're seeing a trend of the marketing year average price getting higher. So it may allow for our reference price to be higher and allow for PLC payments to trigger when we have higher marketing year average prices historically over the years. So let's look at an example. In this example, we're going to look at wheat. And you can see here that our current reference price for wheat is $5.50 per bushel. 115% of that reference price is $6.33 per bushel. So our next step is to determine 85% of our 5-year Olympic average marketing year average price. So the first thing that we need to do is determine what that Olympic average price is. So just like we talked about in the ARC programs, we're going to use a lag year in this process. So if we're looking at the 2019 effective reference price for wheat, we're going to skip the 2018 year and we're going to look at the marketing year average prices from 2013 through 2017. So I've listed those on this slide. You can see here that the marketing year average price in 2013 was $6.87. In 2014, it was $5.99. In 2015, we had $4.89. Then we had $3.89 in 2016 and $4.72 in 2017. To do an Olympic average, we drop our high and our low values from each of those years. So we're going to drop our 2013 value and our 2016 value, and then we're going to average together the remaining 3 values. That's going to give us an Olympic average price of $5.20. So then we're going to multiply that by 85%, and that's going to give us a value of $4.42. So now let's look down here in our comparison chart. So we're going to start at the bottom. So we're going to look at 85% of our 5-year Olympic average, which we calculated to be $4.42, and we're going to compare that to our reference price of $5.50. So we're going to use the greater of those two, which in this example is the reference price of $5.50. Once we know that the reference price is higher, we're going to compare that to 115% of our reference price, and we're going to use the lesser of those. So that is obviously the reference price in this example of $5.50. So what we see here is that our effective reference price for wheat is still $5.50, which is the original reference price that we started with. So we're not going to see a change in our reference price for wheat for the 2019 crop year. This next example is for barley, and in this example we're going to do the same process. So we look at our reference price, which is $4.95, 115% of our reference price, which is $5.69, and then we're going to calculate our 5-year Olympic average. So we're going to look at our prices, our marketing year average prices from 2013 through 2017. We're going to drop our high and our low values in 2013 and 2017, and that's going to give us an Olympic average price of $5.26. We're going to multiply that by 85% to give us a value of $4.47. So now we're going to come down here to our comparison chart. We're going to look at 85% of our 5-year Olympic average, which we just calculated above to be $4.47. We're going to compare that to our reference price of $4.95, and we're going to use the greater of those two. So again, in this example, our current reference price is higher than 85% of our 5-year Olympic average. Then we're going to compare it to 115% of our reference price and use the lesser of those two, which is going to be the current reference price of $4.95. So we have the same effect here, where we do not see a change in our reference price for 2019 using this comparison chart. But let's just say, for example purposes, because we're not too far, our 85% of our 5-year Olympic average is not very far from our current reference price of $4.95. So if we see a trend of higher marketing year average prices for barley over the next several years, we could see a scenario where that 85% of the 5-year Olympic average price may exceed our reference price. So let's just say, for example purposes, that once we calculate a 5-year Olympic average for barley down the road, multiplied by 85%, let's just say that that comes out to be $7. So if that were the case, then we would compare our $7 5-year Olympic average marketing year average price to our reference price of $4.95, and we would use the greater of those two, which would be $7 in this hypothetical example. Then we would compare that to 115% of our reference price, which is $5.69, and use the lesser of those two, which in that example, we would have a reference price of $5.69 per bushel. So what that means is that the current marketing year average price would have to fall lower than $5.69 for a PLC payment to trigger in that scenario. Where for 2019, our effective reference price is going to be $4.95. So that means that the current year price has to fall below $4.95 to trigger a PLC payment for barley. So this does give us a situation where we could see higher reference prices, and that could make it easier for payments to trigger in cases where the marketing year average price is higher in the previous years. But basically, no matter what the 85% of the 5-year Olympic average comes out to be, we will never have an effective reference price that is higher than 150% of the current reference price. So once we determine what the effective reference price and the effective price is, we can come up with our PLC payment rate. And basically, we just come up with our PLC payment rate by subtracting our effective price from our effective reference price. If the effective price is higher than our effective reference price, then we will not have a PLC payment rate. Once we know what our payment rate is, we multiply that by our PLC yield on our farm, and this is the yield that we were talking about updating in the previous section of this webinar. So we will multiply your payment rate by your farm's PLC yield for the commodity, multiplied by the payment acres on the farm, which is 85% of the covered commodities base acres, and that's going to give us your PLC payment on the farm. It's important to note that for PLC, you're not required to plant the crop. We just look at if you have base acres of the crop and the crop triggers a payment, then you will earn a payment if all other eligibility requirements are met. But you're not required to actually plant the crop to earn a PLC payment. So let's look at a quick payment example. For wheat on a farm, our effective reference price, which we talked about on a previous slide, comes out to be $5.50 per bushel. Our effective price, let's just say hypothetically, our effective price comes out to be $4.80 per bushel. So we're going to subtract $4.80 from our effective reference price of $5.50, and that's going to give us a 70-cent PLC payment rate. So now we know that our PLC payment rate is 70 cents. This farm has 100 base acres of wheat and a PLC yield of 45 bushels. So we're going to multiply 100 base acres of wheat by 85% to give us our payment acres of 85. Then we're going to multiply that by the farm's PLC yield for wheat of 45 bushels, multiplied by the PLC payment rate of 70 cents, and that's going to give us a PLC payment on this farm of $2,678. So this slide shows the current PLC payment projections as of October 10th of 2019. This information is available on our website, so you can access our website to access this information, and it is updated on a monthly basis. So you can go in and you can track these prices on a monthly basis to see what the projected marketing year average prices are and what the projected PLC payment rates are. So for 2019 currently for wheat, the projected marketing year average price is $4.70, and that means that we have a projected PLC payment rate of 80 cents for wheat for 2019. For barley, our current projected marketing year average price is $4.65, and so that means that we have a projected PLC payment rate of 30 cents per bushel for barley. You can see that for all of the covered commodities, but it is important to note here that our marketing year for wheat, barley, and oats is June 1st through May 31st. So we do still have a lot of the marketing year left for this crop. So these price projections and PLC payment rate projections could change pretty drastically before May 31st of next year. So it is pretty important, if you're interested in this, that you can go in and track these prices, track the projected PLC payment rates on our website on a monthly basis. This will help you make a decision as to which program you may want to elect for the covered commodities on your farm. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Agriculture Risk Coverage Program with the county option. And this is the program that we do see the most changes in from the previous Farm Bill. They did a lot of things to change the ARC County program. So the ARC County program provides income support looking at yields at the county level. As with the PLC program, you're not required to plant the covered commodity in order to earn an ARC County payment. If you have base acres of the commodity, you could potentially earn an ARC County payment if that ARC County payment triggers in your county. ARC County payment acres, just like in the PLC program, are 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres. So if you have 100 base acres of wheat on your farm, ARC County payment acres are going to be 85 payment acres. And because we're looking at county level yields in this program, you are not required to come in and report your production or give us a yield certification if you're participating in the ARC County program. ARC County payments are going to trigger when the actual revenue in the county falls below the guaranteed revenue for that county. The guarantee is going to be 86% of the benchmark revenue in the county, and we're going to go through an example of how all of that is calculated here in a little bit. The ARC County payment is going to be 85% of the covered commodities base acres on the farm, multiplied by the ARC County payment rate, multiplied by the producer's share on the ARC County enrollment contract. There are a lot of steps in calculating an ARC County payment, and those are shown on this slide here. So our first step is to calculate a benchmark revenue, and that's going to be calculated by multiplying an Olympic average yield by an Olympic average price. And we're going to go through an example of how we do that calculation. Then we're going to calculate a guarantee, which is going to be our benchmark revenue times 86%. Then we're going to calculate our actual crop revenue for the year. And so we're going to look at the actual yield for the county multiplied by the actual marketing year average price for the year. Then we will determine if a loss occurred in the county. Then we're going to look at a payment rate cap, which we'll talk about more later in these slides. And then we're going to calculate the producer's payment. So calculating an ARC County payment is really a 6-step process. And we're going to go through each of those in the following slides. So when we do this example, we're going to look at a farm, farm 123 in County A. There's just one tract in that farm. We have the operator with 100% interest in all crops. So you can see on this slide that this producer has 100 base acres of wheat on the farm, and he plants 100 acres of wheat, which is really irrelevant for the ARC County payment because they're not required to plant any wheat acres. And we do have a program election of ARC County for the wheat on the farm. So for our first step, we are going to calculate our benchmark revenue. So we're going to do a 5-year Olympic average yield multiplied by a 5-year Olympic average price. So when we do those 5-year Olympic average yield and price calculations, we are going to use, again, we're going to use that lag year that I've talked about in previous slides. So if we're doing a payment calculation for 2019, we're going to skip the 2018 year, and we're going to look at 2013 through 2017. We're going to look at price and yield data in each of those 5 years. So for the yield that we're going to use, we are going to use the higher of either the county yield, the actual county yield for the covered commodity, or we're going to use a substitute yield, which is 80% of the T yield in the county for that covered commodity. So we're going to give you the higher of those two values in the benchmark revenue or in the benchmark yield calculation. For the benchmark price, we're going to look at the higher of either the marketing year average price for the year or the effective reference price for the year for the covered commodity. So again, we're going to do the higher of those two price options. So let's look at an example. On this table, we're looking at our same farm that we talked about before, and as I mentioned on the previous slide, we're looking at crop years 2013 through 2017. We're looking at yields for those years, and we're looking at prices. So in this first row of yield data, we have our actual county yields for the years for wheat. So we have in 2013 a yield of 45, in 2014 we have 36, we have a yield of 20 in 2015, 43 in 2016, and 32 for 2017. We're going to compare those actual yields to 80% of the T yield, which is 22 in all years except for 2017. That substitute yield is 21 bushels. So in each year, 2013 through 2017, the actual yield is higher than the substitute yield, except for in 2015, you can see that we had an actual yield of 20 bushels. The substitute yield is 22, so we're going to use that substitute yield of 22 bushels in our benchmark yield calculation. To do our Olympic average yield, we're going to drop our high and our low values. So we're dropping our value from 2013 and from 2015, and we're going to average together the remaining 3, which I've highlighted on this slide. So we're going to average together down here our yields of 36, 43, and 32, and that's going to give us an Olympic average yield of 37 bushels for this county. Our next step is to calculate our Olympic average price. So as I mentioned previously, we're going to compare our marketing year average price to the effective reference price for that covered commodity in each year 2013 through 2017. As you can see on this slide, in 2013 and 2014, our actual marketing year average prices are higher than our effective reference prices in both of those years. But then you can see in 2015 that our prices started to drop, and so our effective reference price of $5.50 is actually higher than our marketing year average prices in each of those 3 years. So we're going to use the marketing year average prices for each of those 3 years. And then we're going to drop our high and our low values. So we're going to drop our high value in 2013 and our low value in 2015. Then we're going to average together the remaining 3, which I've highlighted on these slides. So we're going to calculate our Olympic average price by adding together our prices of $5.99, $5.50, and $5.50 and dividing that by 3, and that's going to give us an Olympic average price of $5.66. Once we've calculated our Olympic average yield and our Olympic average price, we're going to multiply those together to come up with our benchmark revenue. So we're going to multiply 37 bushel yield by $5.66, and that's going to give us a benchmark revenue of $209.42 per acre. Now that we know what our benchmark revenue is in the county, we're going to multiply that by 86% to give us our Ark County guarantee of $180.10 per acre. So our third step, now that we know what our guarantee is, we are going to calculate our actual year revenue for the county. So to do that, we're going to multiply our actual county yield for the year multiplied by the higher of the marketing year average price or the national loan rate for that covered commodity. It's important to note that when we are doing our actual yield calculations, we never use a substitute yield. We're always going to use the actual yield that is in the county. And again, as a reminder, that actual yield is determined by RMA data, or if RMA data is not available, then we look to NASS data for that information. And if NASS data is not available, then we have the state committee establish those yields. So in this example, let's just say that that county average yield came out to be 35 bushels. So then we're going to multiply our actual yield of 35 bushels by either the marketing year average price or the national loan rate for that covered commodity, whichever one is higher. So in this example, we're going to say that our marketing year average price for wheat is $4.80. So that's higher than our national loan rate of $3.38. So we're going to multiply our yield of 35 bushels by $4.80, and that's going to give us an actual crop revenue of $168 per acre. So now we have to determine if a loss occurred for that covered commodity. So to do that, we're going to subtract our actual year revenue from the guarantee that we established on the previous slides. If the guarantee, or if the actual year revenue is higher than our guarantee, then there's not a loss and we will not have a payment rate calculated in the county. Then, once we determine what the loss amount was, we have to determine if the payment rate cap is exceeded. For the ARC programs, these are shallow loss programs, and so that means that these programs will never fully compensate you if you have a total loss. They work really well with crop insurance to compensate you, but they're never going to fully compensate you for a total loss on your farm. And the way that we do that is we have a payment rate cap that we put into effect. And that payment rate cap is 10% of the benchmark revenue calculated in the county. And so once we determine what the payment rate is in the county, we have to make sure that it does not exceed the payment rate cap. So in our example, we've calculated the guarantee to be $180.10 per acre. And so what that means is that the actual revenue for the year has to fall below $180.10 per acre in order for an Ark County payment rate to be established for wheat. So in this example, our Ark County actual revenue came out to be $168 per acre, which is less than our guarantee. So we subtract our actual revenue from our guarantee to come up with a shortfall of $12.10 per acre. Now we have to compare that to our payment rate cap, which is 10% of our benchmark revenue that we calculated. So that payment rate cap is $20.94 per acre. In this example, our actual shortfall did not exceed our payment rate cap. So we're going to use our actual shortfall of $12.10 per acre as our Ark County payment rate in that county. So now we're ready to calculate our producer payment. So we're going to take 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres on the farm, multiplied by the payment rate that we just calculated, multiplied by the producer share on the Ark County enrollment contract. So in our example, this farm, if you remember from the first slide, had 100 base acres of wheat. So we're going to multiply 100 base acres times 85% to give us our payment acres of 85. Then we're going to multiply that by our payment rate that we calculated in the county of $12.10 per acre. The producer's share on this farm is 100%, and so that is going to give us an Ark County payment for this farm of $1,029. And again, as I said previously, the producer is not required to plant wheat in order to earn this payment. They will earn this payment as long as they have base acres of wheat, and wheat triggers a payment in that county. So that's kind of the perfect world example, but now we're going to talk about a couple of things that can complicate that process a little bit. And the first is that physical location policy that I talked about in the first portion of this webinar. So just to remind you what the physical location policy is, the 2018 Farm Bill requires us to make Ark County payments based on the physical location of the land located in the farm. And so to do that, if you have a farm, let's just talk about that example that I brought up earlier. If you have a farm with land that is physically located in Gallatin and Park counties, we're going to establish benchmark revenues and guaranteed revenues and actual revenues for Gallatin County and for Park County. And then we're going to weight those revenues based on how many acres you have in each physical location on your farm, and then we're going to summarize those revenues to come up with a unique payment rate for your farm. So depending on how many acres you have in each physical location, you will have a different payment rate than any other producer that has farms administered out of the Gallatin County office. So let's just look at a quick example, and this is a very general example. We have 500 total base acres on the farm. 200 of those base acres physically are located in County A, which in this example we're going to say is Gallatin County, and 215 base acres on that farm is physically located in County B, which we are going to say is Park County in this example. So what that means is 50% of the base acres are going to be weighted using the revenues that are calculated for Gallatin County, and 50% of the base acres on your farm are going to be weighted using the revenues that are calculated for Park County. And then we're going to summarize those to the farm level, and you're going to have one unique payment rate for your farm. This can be kind of a complicated process, and so if you have a farm that falls into this situation where you have land that is physically located in more than one county, I do encourage you to go into the county office. They can give you some more detailed payment examples to show you how that process works, and they can go through that for you with your farm so that you can know what your guarantees are and have a good idea if the Ark County program may be a benefit for you. Another thing that can kind of complicate the Ark County program is the irrigated and non-irrigated policy. Again, this is something that we talked about in the previous portion of this training. But just to refresh your memory, we generally will use blended revenues for the Ark County program to include irrigated and non-irrigated revenues. However, in certain circumstances, if certain criteria is met, we will have separate revenues calculated for irrigated and non-irrigated production of the commodity. The criteria that has to be met is included on this slide. So first of all, we look to RMA data for 2013 through 2017. If we have irrigated and non-irrigated acreage irrigated and non-irrigated data from RMA in 3 of those 5 years, then your county meets that criteria for the specific covered commodity to have separate irrigated and non-irrigated revenues calculated. If that criteria is not met, then we look to FSA records. And if based on FSA data, 10% of the commodity was irrigated and 10% of it was non-irrigated between the years of 2013 through 2017 in the county, and an average of 5,000 acres were planted in the county every year 2013 through 2017, then you meet the criteria to have separate irrigated and non-irrigated revenues calculated. It's important to note here that we are going to be re-evaluating these counties beginning in 2021. So the map that I showed you earlier in this training that showed the specific covered commodities that met this criteria in the state, that could change beginning in 2021. We're going to re-evaluate this information, and so you may meet this criteria in future years where you may not currently. Once you have met the criteria to have separate irrigated and non-irrigated revenues established in your county, then we look to each farm and we calculate something that we call a historical irrigated percentage, which we call a HIP, for each farm that is in that county that has base acres of the specific covered commodities that met that criteria. In order to come up with a HIP, we divide the 2013 through 2013 planted and considered planted irrigated acres of that commodity by the total planted and considered planted acres of that commodity on the farm from 2013 through 2017. Once we determine what the HIP is on the farm, that's going to help us determine how many of your base acres are considered irrigated base acres and how many are considered non-irrigated base acres. And kind of similar to what we did with the physical location process, we're going to look at the irrigated revenues and the non-irrigated revenues. We're going to weight those revenues based on whatever your HIP percentage is, and then we're going to summarize those to the farm level, which means, again, as with what we talked about under the physical location process, in these situations where we have irrigated and non-irrigated revenues calculated, we could have different payment rates for every farm in the county depending on what the HIP is on that specific farm. So let's look at a very general example of how we calculate our HIP. If we have a farm, in this example we're looking at farm 209, there's 1,000 acres of irrigated wheat that was planted during the 2013 through 2017 crop years, and we had 1,200 total acres of wheat planted during those same years. So we're going to divide 1,000 acres of irrigated wheat by 1,200 total planted acres of wheat during those years, and that's going to give us a HIP percentage of 83% on this farm. So what that means is that 83% of the base acres on this farm are going to be considered irrigated wheat base acres, and the 17% of the base acres are going to be considered non-irrigated wheat base acres. So if we have 1,000 base acres on the farm, we're going to multiply that by 83% to give us 830 base acres of wheat that we are going to weight using the irrigated revenues calculated in the county. And we're going to multiply 1,000 base acres times 17%, which is going to give us 170 acres that are going to be considered non-irrigated wheat base acres, and we will weight those using our non-irrigated revenues calculated in the county. Once we do these calculations, we're going to summarize those to the farm level so that you have one unique ARC County payment rate for your farm. Again, as I mentioned previously, we could have separate or different payment rates for each farm in the county depending on what the HIP percentage is that's calculated for each individual farm. Again, as I mentioned with the physical location, if you have questions and you want to see a more detailed payment rate calculation for either an ARC County physical location payment or an ARC County irrigated, non-irrigated payment, please do go into the county office. They have been trained on how that process works, and they can go through a more detailed example with you. The final program option that I'm going to talk about today is the Agricultural Risk Coverage Program with the individual option. And this program is referred to as ARC-IC. Before I get too far into the PLC into ARC-IC, I want to talk a little bit about PLC and ARC County. So basically, let's talk about when will a farm receive a PLC payment. Well, a PLC payment is going to be earned when the marketing year average price for the year falls below the effective reference price. This program provides price protection only. So for ARC County, we're going to be triggering payments when the actual revenue in the county falls below the guaranteed revenue in that county for that specific covered commodity. We are looking at income support in this program, so we're looking at yield and price, but we're looking at the county level, not the individual level. So a couple of questions for you to consider. If the crops on your farm are destroyed due to a natural disaster, or if you plant a covered commodity that fails, will you receive an ARC County or PLC payment? The answer to that question is maybe, but maybe not. I mean, maybe PLC will still trigger a payment, maybe Ark County will trigger a payment, but it likely will not be due to the losses that you suffered on your farm. We all know how, for example, hail works. Hail may only hit a small portion of the county, and so maybe you suffer a pretty significant loss due to a hailstorm, but maybe that hailstorm was not significant enough to affect the county level yields, so maybe an Ark County payment wouldn't trigger in that example. And it likely would not have affected the national prices, and so the disaster that you suffer on your farm would likely not affect a PLC payment. However, ARC-IC is something that you may want to consider if you are looking for that kind of protection for your farm, because ARC-IC is going to provide income support at the individual farm level. So we're going to look at your actual yields from your farm when we establish the benchmark revenues and the actual year revenues to determine payment. One thing to note about ARC-IC that is quite a bit different from previous programs is that you are required to plant a covered commodity in order to earn an ARC-IC payment. You have to plant at least 1/100 of an acre of a covered commodity in order for us to calculate revenues to see if you will earn an ARC-IC payment. There is one thing that I want to note here, that we may include prevent plant acres in cases where 100% of your farm's initially reported covered commodities are approved prevent plant. So we can include prevent plant as long as all of your covered commodities were approved prevent plant for that year. Any producer who does not share in the farm's planted covered commodities are not eligible to earn an ARC-IC payment. So we're not necessarily looking at who has a share of the base acres in the ARC-IC program. We are just looking at who has a share in the farm's planted covered commodities as reported on the FSA 578, which is our acreage report. One unique thing about the ARC-IC program is that we provide income support to you no matter which of the 22 covered commodities you plant. So you could potentially have wheat and barley base acres on your farm, but you could choose to plant corn and canola, and we're still going to calculate revenues for you and determine if you had a loss. So you're not required to plant the covered commodities that you have base acres for. You are required to plant covered commodities, but not the ones you have base acres for. One important thing to understand when we're talking about ARC-IC is the ARC-IC farm. We do also refer to this sometime as the producer's bucket. And what that means is that when we're looking at ARC-IC revenue calculations, we are going to look at the revenues from all of the farms that you have enrolled in the ARC-IC program throughout the state of Montana. So if you have a farm that's enrolled in ARC-IC in Gallatin County and in Madison County and in Beaverhead County, we're going to look at the revenues from all of those farms and determine if overall, between all of your ARC-IC enrolled farms, you suffered a loss. What that means is that maybe in the example that I talked about before, where you have a farm in Gallatin, Madison, and Beaverhead County, and they're all enrolled in the ARC-IC program, maybe you suffer a significant loss on your Gallatin County farm, but maybe the revenue from your Beaverhead and Madison County farms will offset that loss so that overall you don't suffer a loss. Or you could do really well with your wheat crop, but not do very well with your corn crop, and so maybe that revenue from the wheat could offset the loss that you have from the corn. So that's just something to consider when you're determining whether to go into the ARC-IC program as well. ARC-IC payments are going to trigger when the actual revenue from all of your planted covered commodities on all of your ARC-IC enrolled farms falls below the guaranteed revenue for your ARC-IC farm. A couple things that we do not consider when we're looking at ARC-IC revenues. We do not consider any revenues from ARC-IC farms that are not enrolled in the current year. So even if you have an ARC-IC election on a farm, if you don't enroll it in the current year, then the revenue from that farm will not be included when we do those calculations. We also do not look at any crop insurance indemnities when we calculate your farm's revenue. Payment acres are 65% of the total base acres on the farm. So this is a big change from the other two program options, because if you remember from for PLC in Ark County, we were looking at 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres. For Ark IC, we're looking at 65% of the total base acres. So this is just kind of a matter of perspective. This could be a benefit, or it could not be. So let's just look at an example. So if we have a farm that has 1,000 base acres of wheat and 500 base acres of barley, let's just say that producer comes in and plants 2,000 acres of lentils. So he doesn't have base acres of lentils. He has base acres of wheat and barley, but he plants lentils. But that doesn't matter. As long as he plants a covered commodity, we're still going to take the total 1,500 base acres on the farm multiplied by 65%, and that will give this producer 975 payment acres that we will use in his payment calculation. Now, the same thing will hold true if the producer plants only 1 acre of corn. Again, we don't have base acres of corn. We have base acres of wheat and barley, but he planted at least 1/100 of an acre of a covered commodity. He planted 1 acre of corn, and so we're going to use that total 1,500 base acres times 65%, and that's going to give him 975 payment acres that we are going to use in his payment calculation. Let's talk a little bit about Ark IC eligible commodities. So when we are looking at Ark IC eligible commodities, we're only going to look at initially planted covered commodities. So if you have a situation where maybe you plant winter wheat and it fails, and then you come behind that and you plant barley, we're not going to look at that barley that you planted as a subsequent crop. We're going to only include the initially reported failed winter wheat when we look at your eligible Ark IC commodities. We only look at covered commodities that are planted on enrolled Ark IC farms. So if you have some farms that are in PLC or Ark County, we're not going to look at any commodities produced on those farms when we're calculating your Ark IC payment. If you have an Ark IC enrolled farm that you don't end up planting any covered commodities on, that farm will not be able to earn any Ark IC payments. And again, just some reminder about prevent plant acres. We will include prevent plant acres when 100% of the farm's initially planted covered commodities are approved prevent plant. So let's take a look at the yield certification, because we are looking at individual yields in this program, and so that does require you to come in and do a yield certification for us. We need you to come in and complete that yield certification on a CCC 863. And when you complete that form, you're going to need to give us the current year yield as well as the benchmark year yield. So we need the 5 years worth of data to establish your benchmark, and we need your current year yield. The deadline for you to report your production to us is July 15th in the year following the crop year. So for your 2019 yields, we need you to come in and give those to us by July 15th of 2020. Your yield is going to be certified by farm number. So if you have 3 different Ark IC farms that you planted wheat on, you're going to come in and complete 3 separate yield certifications, 1 for each farm. When you come in and do that, you're not going to give us your production, you're going to give us a yield. So you're going to basically take your total production divided by the planted acres of that specific covered commodity on your farm to come up with your total yield. As with the PLC yield update process, we are not going to take your yield records when you come in and certify your yields, but you are subject to spot check for the life of the farm bill. As I've mentioned before, we do strongly encourage that you use RMA data if you have it, because that does make the spot check process very easy. Currently, the rules say that we're going to spot check 5% of our Ark IC farms in the county each year. So if you do participate in this program, it is very likely that you will be chosen for spot check at some point during the life of the farm bill. So I do strongly encourage you to keep good records for the spot check process. We do keep the certified yields on the farm, even if the land is sold or the operator changes. So once those benchmark yields are certified for the farm, those are going to remain with the farm no matter who the producer is in future years. So the yields that we're going to use, if the crop was planted in the benchmark year, so when we're looking at our 5 years worth of data, if you planted that crop in in each of the years, we're going to use either your actual yield or we're going to use 80% of the T yield, whichever is higher. So you're going to come in, you have to certify a yield if the crop was planted on the farm in that year, so you can either certify to a 0 or an actual yield, and then we're going to give you the higher of what you certify or 80% of the T yield in the county. But there may be situations where maybe you're planting corn for the first time, and so you don't have 5 years worth of yield data so that we can establish a benchmark. In cases where the crop was not planted in one or more of the benchmark years, we are going to give you an assigned yield, which is going to be 100% of the county average yield in your benchmark so that we can establish that guaranteed revenue for you. For ARC-IC, we don't have any provisions to do separate irrigated and non-irrigated revenues. So when you come in and do your yield certifications, you're going to certify to a blended yield to include production from irrigated and non-irrigated acres of the covered commodity. We only want yields from your initial covered commodities. So if you have subsequent plant covered commodities, we don't want any yield certified for those. And when you do a yield certification, we're going to include all eligible types of that covered commodity. So for example, if you have winter wheat and spring wheat, you're just going to come in and certify one wheat yield to include all of your winter wheat and spring wheat production. If you do have acres that are hayed or grazed, you can come in and the county office will help you to convert those to a bushel value to include on your yield certification. So now I'm going to talk about how we calculate our ARC-IC payments. As with the ARC County process, it is a multi-step process, and it is actually pretty similar to how we calculate our ARC County payments. So step 1, we're going to calculate a weighted benchmark revenue for the producer's ARC-IC farm. Then we're going to calculate a guarantee. Then we're going to calculate the farm's actual revenue for the year, and then we'll determine if there's a loss. We will then determine if the loss exceeds the 10% payment rate cap, so that's just like what we talked about in ARC County. Then we're going to calculate the producer's ARC-IC payment rate, and then we are going to apply that ARC-IC payment rate to all of the producer's ARC-IC enrolled farms in the state. So step 1, we're going to calculate our weighted benchmark revenue for the farm. So basically, because of the bucket concept that we use for the ARC-IC program, each producer is going to have a unique benchmark revenue calculated based on their share of all the planted covered commodities on all of their ARC-IC enrolled farms in the state. So we will calculate a benchmark revenue for each planted covered commodity that the producer has in their bucket for the year. In order to do that, we calculate an Olympic average annual revenue for the 5 years prior to the year preceding the current year. So that's basically just saying that we're using that lag year that we've talked about in the PLC and ARC County programs, where we skip the year immediately preceding the crop year, and then we look at the 5 years prior to that. So for 2019, we're going to skip 2018, and we're going to look at the prices and yields from the 2013 through 2017 crop years. So in order to come up with our annual revenue, we multiply a benchmark yield by a benchmark price in each year. The benchmark yield that we use is going to be the higher of either the yield that you certified or the substitute yield, which again was going to be 80% of the T yield in the county. Or if the crop was not planted in the specific year, we're going to use the assigned yield, which is 100% of the county average yield in that year. The benchmark prices that we're looking at is just like what we looked at in the ARC County program. We're going to use the larger of the marketing year average price for the commodity or the effective reference price for the covered commodity. So let's look at an example. They did do this a little bit different than we had in the ARC County program. If you remember in ARC County, we calculated an Olympic average yield and an Olympic average price, and then we multiplied those together to get our benchmark revenue. For the ARC-IC program, we actually calculate a revenue for each year by multiplying the higher price option by the higher yield option, and then we come up with an annual revenue for each of the 5 years in the benchmark period, and then we do our Olympic average of the annual revenues. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. First, we compare our prices. So we're going to compare our marketing year average price in each year to the effective reference price, and we're going to use the higher of those two figures. Then we're going to compare the certified yield by the producer to the substitute yield, and we're going to use the higher of those two figures. So for 2013, the marketing year average price of $6.87 is higher than our effective reference price of $5.50. Our certified yield of 52 bushels is higher than our substitute yield of 35. So for 2013, we're going to multiply $6.87 by 52 bushels, and that's going to give us an annual revenue for 2013 of $357.24. We are going to do that same process for 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017 so that we can come up with an annual revenue for each of our 5 years in the benchmark period. Now we have to calculate our Olympic average. So we drop our high and our low values in 2013 and 2017, and then we average together our remaining values, which I've highlighted on the slide, from 2014 through 2016. So we add those values together, which gives us a total of $774.95. We're going to divide that by 3 years worth of data, and that's going to give us a benchmark revenue of $258.32 per acre for wheat. Okay? Now, if we have a situation where there is more than one covered commodity planted in the producer's ARC-IC farm, then we need to weight those benchmark revenues according to that specific covered commodities percentage of the total covered commodities that are planted on the ARC-IC farm. So let's just continue on with our example. So in our example, let's just say that this producer had wheat and barley that he planted on his ARC-IC farm. He planted 1,000 acres of wheat and he plants 600 acres of barley. So that gives us a total of 1,600 total planted covered commodities in this producer's ARC-IC enrolled farm. So now we need to determine what percentage of the total covered commodities planted is wheat. So we're going to divide our wheat base acres by our total, our wheat planted acres by our total planted covered commodity acres. So we're going to do 1,000 divided by 1,600, and that's going to tell us that 62.5% of the farm's total planted covered commodities were wheat. We're going to do something similar for barley. We're going to divide 600 planted acres of barley by 1,600 total planted covered commodity acres, and that's going to tell us that 37.5% of the farm's planted covered commodities are barley. So what are we going to do with those percentages? Basically, we're going to apply those percentages to the benchmark revenues that we calculate for each of the covered commodities. So on the previous slide, we calculated a benchmark revenue for wheat of $258.32 per acre. So we're going to now apply our percentage that we calculated for wheat of 62.5. So we're going to multiply our benchmark revenue by our 62.5%, and that's going to give us a weighted benchmark revenue of $161.45 for wheat. Now we're going to do the same thing for barley. I didn't go through a slide where we calculated a benchmark revenue for barley, but let's just say for example purposes that we calculated a benchmark revenue for barley of $291. So now we're going to multiply that by our percentage for barley of 37.5%. That's going to give us a weighted benchmark revenue of $109.13 for barley. Once we calculate a weighted benchmark revenue for each of the covered commodities in the ARC-IC farm, we're going to add those together to give us a total weighted farm benchmark revenue of $270.58 per acre. So now that we know what our total weighted farm benchmark revenue is, we can calculate our ARC-IC guarantee. So to do that, we take our ARC-IC benchmark revenue of $270.58, we multiply that by 86%, and that's going to give us a guarantee of $232.70 per acre. So what that means is that this farm's actual revenue has to fall below $232.70 per acre in 2019 in order for an ARC-IC payment to trigger. So now let's calculate our ARC-IC actual revenue. So our actual revenue is calculated by multiplying the actual yield for the covered commodity by the higher of the marketing year average price or the national loan rate for that specific covered commodity. Again, just like what we talked about in the Ark County program, we will never use a substitute yield when we're calculating our actual revenue. We're always going to use whatever you report to us as your actual yields for the year. We are going to weight the actual revenue based on the producer's share of that specific crop. And we're going to go through an example of that so you can see how that's all going to work. So in this example, let's just say that our producer comes in and tells us that his wheat yield for 2019 is 35 bushels and his barley yield came in at 48 bushels. Our hypothetical marketing year average prices in this example is going to be $5.20 for wheat, $4.60 for barley. And again, we have our acres that we planted. We planted 1,000 acres of wheat and 600 acres of barley. So we're going to multiply all of those things together. So we're going to multiply our certified yield for wheat of 35 bushels, multiplied by our marketing year average price of $5.20, multiplied by our 1,000 planted acres, and that's going to give us total revenue of $182,000 from wheat. We're going to do the same thing for barley, which is going to give us a total revenue of $132,480 from barley. We're going to then add those two values together to give us a total revenue from the farm of $314,480. Now again, this may not be what you actually received on your farm because we're using those national marketing year average prices. We're not using the prices that you actually received, but that's how we calculate your actual revenue for the year. Once we calculate the total revenue, we're going to divide that by the total planted acres of a covered commodity, which was 1,600, and that's going to give us a revenue per acre of $196.55 per acre. In this example, the producer had 100% of both of the covered commodities, so we're going to give him 100% of that in his bucket. And so that's going to give him a total revenue of $196.55 per acre for 2019. Now our next step is to determine if a loss occurred. So we're going to, in order to do that, we're going to subtract the guaranteed revenue, or we're going to subtract the actual revenue from the guaranteed revenue that we calculated. So in this example, our guaranteed revenue is $232.70 per acre. We're going to subtract our actual revenue of $196.55 per acre from that. And that does show that we had a loss of $36.15 per acre. If our actual revenue had been higher than our guarantee, we wouldn't have a loss and there wouldn't be an ARC-IC payment that triggered. But in this example, we do see a loss of $36.15 per acre. So now we have to determine our payment rate. So in this example, we have our loss per acre that came out at $36.15 per acre, but we have to compare it to our payment rate cap, which we talked about earlier. So in order to get that payment rate cap, we multiply our weighted benchmark revenue, which was $270.58 for this farm, by 10%, and that gives us a payment rate cap of $27.06. So in this example, our actual loss per acre exceeds our payment rate cap of $27.06. So we're going to use the payment rate cap of $27.06 instead of our actual loss per acre of $36.15. So now that we have calculated that producer's payment, we will apply that payment rate to all of their farms that are enrolled in ARC-IC in the state. So if he had 5 farms that were enrolled in ARC-IC in the state, his payment rate of $27.06 would be applied to each of those farms because we put all of his revenues from all of his farms into that bucket. And so that's why the payment rate is the same on all of his farms, because it's his loss overall across all of his farms. But in this example, we're just going to look at one farm. We're going to just say that he had one farm enrolled in ARC-IC. He had 100% share. There's 500 base acres of barley, 200 base acres of corn, and 50 base acres of oats. And so we're going to take all of those base acres multiplied by 65% to give us our payment acres of 487.5 payment acres. We're going to multiply that by the producer's share, which was 100%, and then we're going to multiply that by 2706, which is the payment rate that we calculated for this producer. That is going to give us a payment rate of $13,192 for this producer on this farm. Again, it's important to note that no matter how many acres of a commodity this producer planted, we're going to always include 65% of the total base acres on the farm. So that wraps up the discussion about our 3 program options, and I know that that is a lot of information to process. And so in these next slides, I'm just going to do a quick comparison of all 3 program options. So we have our PLC and ARC County and ARC IC program. When we're looking at the type of protection that is provided between all 3 of these programs, PLC is only going to offer price protection. ARC County is going to offer income support at a county level, and ARC IC is going to offer income support at an individual farm level. For PLC and ARC County, the people who are eligible for payment are producers who have a share of a commodity that is the farm's base acres. It's going to be a producer who has a share of anything that is produced on the farm's base acres. For ARC IC, we're looking at who has a share of the farm's planted covered commodities, not necessarily who has a share of the base acres, but who has a share of the farm's planted covered commodities. For PLC, we're using national prices plus the farm's PLC yield. For ARC County, we're using national prices, the same national prices from PLC, and we're using a county level yield. And then for ARC IC, we're using those same national prices, and we're using the producer's individually certified yields on his farm. The payments are going to be determined for PLC and ARC County by what the specific covered commodities base acres are on the farm. But for ARC IC, we're going to use all of the covered commodities that are on the farm, and we're going to determine payments based on the covered commodities that are planted on the farm. A payment acre comparison for PLC and ARC County, we're going to look at 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres on the farm. For ARC IC, we're going to use all of the base acres on the farm times 65%. Production reporting is not required for PLC or ARC County, but it is required for the ARC IC program so that we can have your individual yields to determine payments. You are not required to plant any covered commodities to participate in the PLC or ARC County programs, but for ARC IC, you are required to plant at least 1/100 of an acre of a covered commodity, unless 100% of your farm's planted covered commodities are approved prevent plant, and then we can consider those prevent plant acres. For program elections, for PLC and ARC County, you can make that program election on a covered commodity by covered commodity basis. You can mix and match those program elections between the covered commodities on your farm. However, for ARC IC, if you make a program election of that, then that applies to all of the covered commodities that you have on your farm. Payment limitation is something that I haven't mentioned before this slide. For all 3 programs, we have a payment limitation of $125,000. That is shared between all 3 programs. So if you have a farm in PLC and a farm in ARC IC, you can earn a total of $125,000 between both of those farms. If you remember, under the previous Farm Bill, we had to share that $125,000 with LDPs and marketing assistance loan gains. However, that is no longer the case under the 2018 Farm Bill, so that full $125,000 is for ARC and PLC programs. One thing that I do want to note with the payment limitation is that if you've participated in our programs before, you probably are familiar with the sequestration rate. All of our payments are sequestered, and so that means that we reduce our payments by a certain percentage. So, for example, if the sequestration rate for a year is 6%, then that payment limitation would be reduced by 6%. So even though the payment limitation is $125,000, you likely will not receive that full $125,000 due to sequestration. Payments are issued sometime after October 1st in the year following the marketing year of the crop. And so basically for all three programs, we are always a year behind. So we are currently issuing payments for the 2018 crop year. 2019 payments will go out sometime after October 1st of 2020. The reason for that delay is because we have to wait for those final marketing year average prices to be announced and for the current year yields to be determined. For PLC and Ark County, the payments usually begin to be issued sometime in the beginning of October. For Ark IC payments, those usually are delayed until sometime in November or December due to software. We have to wait for software to be able to issue those payments, which isn't usually available until then. This next slide just shows where you can get some of our program information. This is where you can go to access that page that will show you the projected PLC payment rates. It will also tell you your Ark County guarantees, Ark County payment rates throughout the state. You also can access decision tools from this page. So this is a really good page for you to go to for important program information. I do also like to encourage all of our producers to sign up for GovDelivery. GovDelivery is a system that we use to contact our producers via email. You can sign up to get newsletters via email and important reminders via email. And there is also something that's fairly new that we do. It's text reminders. That's not something that we blast you with text every day. However, you could get a text like the week of a deadline that will remind you to go in and sign your ARC PLC contract. So I do think that both of those are very beneficial, and I encourage you to sign up for those. And to do that, you would just contact your local county office. And I just want to end this presentation with a slide to remind you of some important deadlines that are coming up. This is the most important slide of the presentation because it's just really important that you don't miss these deadlines. The 2019 enrollment and election deadline is going to be March 15th of 2020, so you definitely need to get in by March 15th to make that program election and get signed up for the 2019 crop year. The 2020 enrollment deadline is June 30th of 2020. The yield update is September 30th of 2020. It is possible that if you go in and you have everyone with you that you need to sign your forms, that you can complete all three of these activities in one office visit. However, I do strongly encourage you to contact the county office prior to going in to set up an appointment so they're ready for you. So that is everything that I have to cover today. I thank you all for listening to today's presentation. And don't forget to contact your local county office to get signed up for these programs. Thank you.